Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to connect with us and join this webinar, which focuses on managing your brand and reputation during the COVID-19 environment and beyond. If you'd like to ask questions throughout, please do submit them via the Q&A function on your screen and we'll answer them at the end. If we don't get time to deal with all the questions, then please do resubmit them by events@irwinmitchell.com. You'll get a prompt at the end and we'll follow up with you directly. We're also going to be recording this virtual event and we'll send a recording out to you afterwards. So I'm Georgie Collins and I'm joined by my colleague Olivia Roxton. We specialise in IP and media and reputation management. Reputational risk is nothing new, but in the extraordinary times that we're finding ourselves in, what has very much come to the fore is how vital reputation management is, and actually how difficult it can be to manage in the current time of crisis, particularly so at a time when the move to an online world has increased so exponentially. How an individual or an organisation responds to the challenges presented by COVID-19, whether that's operational, strategic, financial, and amongst the whirlwind of the employment, contractual and other legal and commercial issues that are impacting around us, has an impact on reputation, good or bad. We're going to discuss our top tips and recommendations for identifying some of your risks, how you manage your reputation and avoid some of the mistakes that we've seen in the recent weeks and how they've impacted adversely in terms of a brand's reputation. So first thing we're going to look at is around business continuity and reputation management, laying the foundations and getting it right from the beginning. The COVID environment very much casts a spotlight on your business continuity, disaster recovery, risk and reputation plan, together with any cyber security plan you might have in place. It's certainly called into question whether those plans are fit for purpose in this COVID environment. Has your risk matrix has the risk matrix of the challenges that you otherwise thought you faced changed? Are the threats different? Have you identified this and have you assessed it? Certainly most risk and crisis management plans weren't formulated with the prospect that majority, if not all staff, would be working from home for a relatively sustained period of time, and certainly not at a time when the infrastructure of an IT system was overloaded and suddenly more vulnerable. Neither were most plans formulated on the basis of a sustained global interruption to business and supply chain. Usually most business continuity plans and certainly cybersecurity plans look at a short period of interruption. A recent survey by Gartner revealed that only 12% of businesses were prepared for the impact of COVID-19, and some would say 12% is actually a higher percentage than others might imagine. Organisations that had to revisit their business continuity plan, risk, cyber plans at the start of COVID are now needing to reassess again and reshape those plans, certainly in terms of the evolving economic climate and concerns of a second wave of the virus, and that this new normal could be much more sustained than it might have first been thought. This slide shows a fairly typical life cycle of any business continuity risk management plans. Organisations, in our experience, often find it quite difficult to identify their risks, or at least what I'd say is their worst case scenario risks. They all seem too unlikely to them. I give an example of working for a retail client in relation to its risk management and disaster recovery plan. I asked the board what its greatest risk was. It said our IT systems going down, meaning they couldn't fulfil or take orders. For some reason, the organisation envisaged this might be short-lived. I asked them what would happen if this incident happened a week before Christmas, with the website going down over a weekend when staff typically weren't on call, and more so that actually its site would be down until after Christmas. The response I got was that'd be an absolute disaster. That was the answer I was looking for, and that would be a disaster is exactly the focus of what the business continuity and risk management plan should look at. So just giving a bit more focus on these particular elements and things for you to consider, which ultimately can really impact on your brand reputation. So predicting the threats and issues, it sounds probably quite trite to say, but know your reputation. What does it mean to your organisation? Why is it important to you, your customers, your market? That really informs the actions you might take, in particular the tone that you use in response to incidents. We can all think of brands that have negative brand connotation and seem to perpetuate that in their comms, and certainly we've seen a number of those examples over the past recent weeks. There's a real importance in terms of horizon scanning to identify your risks, external factors, economic in particular at the moment, social, political. Internal factors too have a big measure, your people, your systems, policies, procedures. Different organisations have different appetites for risk. What are your top 3 worst case scenarios? Might be a combination of internal and external. Have these changed now? What previously might have been a major issue for you around, say, product liability, data loss, a systems failure, could now be around people safety. What happens if a significant proportion of your workforce are ill? How do you adapt without access to traditional working and environments for a sustained period of time? What are the gaps for you to get back to original service levels and maintain them? Do you have a number of suppliers in case another is not available? Preparing your plan. Understand what issues and risks can't be resolved immediately, certainly around the social, economic and political issues affecting a business, and how might you manage that? Can you still offer the services that you did virtually instead of in person, delivery instead of on site, hand sanitizer instead of beer, ventilators instead of vacuum cleaners? We've seen some amazing examples, which we'll come on to a bit later, of how people have adapted, but that isn't the case for every business to be able to do that. Looking at who your team is, who's critical, looking at your professional advisors, legal, PR potentially, accountancy related, who know your business and are part of your crisis management plan is really, really important. Preparing your MAP plan and coaching and train your team is absolutely critical. It's no point just having a document that sits in the drawer. You need to put it into action and carry out some sort of simulation testing. One of the issues that we've seen in terms of putting a crisis management plan into operation at the moment is that people anticipated doing that in a live in-person environment rather than a more virtual environment. Think about drafting an internal and external comms for your 3 most identified worst case scenarios. It's much easier to do that with a cool head than suddenly once a crisis hit and everyone's lost their head. Looking at your response. Your plan is your set of instructions in the event of an incident, subject to certain vagaries. Assemble your incident response team, your professional advisors and your spokespeople, and go to plan. Your communications, both internal and external, when, to whom and what tone, are absolutely critical in terms of your response. Have you got all you need in order to communicate to your employees, your clients, your suppliers and stakeholders? That needs to be in your toolkit. Think about recording your actions and reasons for taking certain decisions and responses. They can help you when issues are raised after the event, why you did what you did, particularly from a legal liability and insurance perspective. Then recover. Takes time. You need to review performance, have an assessment of your preparedness. In certain cases, there'll be issues around rebuilding trust and reputation. Be realistic in the time that you allow to get your business critical functions back to some sense of normal. One thing that we've seen impacted in the context of business continuity plans, disaster recovery, and that refresh of where we are is in relation to supply chain. Olivia is now going to take a deeper dive into that issue and discuss some of the issues we've seen. Olivia, over to you.
Thanks, Georgie. So, welcome to everyone joining us. You'll be aware, unfortunately, probably from your own experiences, that supply chains are under huge stress at the moment, particularly where imported products are concerned, but it's not just limited to those. Reduced staffing levels and transportation possibilities has meant that many businesses will have gone through periods or may still be going through periods where you're struggling to comply with your obligations and either supply customers or honour bookings. The pandemic has really exposed the fragility of the supply chain. Where consumers are concerned, it may have already led you to situations where customers are frustrated with your inability, often for perfectly legitimate reasons given the current circumstances, to supply what you've promised. There are obviously contractual issues at play here, and we will provide the link at the end, but you can find detail on our coronavirus hub on our website, which gives articles written by our colleagues in relation to frustration of contracts which are now impossible to perform, and force majeure clauses which could be relevant in terms of contractual relief from your obligations. But it's also very relevant to consider it from a reputational perspective, both in terms of your relationships with your suppliers and with your customers. in terms of suppliers, you need to keep the lines of communication open with the other party. They're likely to be, hopefully, more understanding in the current climate because they have their own reputation to consider after all, and they're likely experiencing similar issues to you. It's a time to avoid and perhaps reconsider any previous policies which meant that an overly aggressive, hardline approach was adopted in relation to potential disputes or negative comments. Take a commercial approach and, as I say, keep that line of communication open. The supplier relationships will still be needed after this worst of the pandemic has subsided, for now at least. So if you try and keep them on the same side, it will loosen the job that you have in the months to come. Where consumers are concerned, supply chain issues obviously lead to cancelled orders, negative online reviews, comments on social media, unwanted publicity and influencing other customers away, often unfairly, from your brand towards competitors. And in a world where social media rules, and particularly Twitter, is becoming ever prominent, you're at real risk of long-lasting damage beyond the pandemic by making promises you can't keep. Again, with consumers, avoiding overtly aggressive stances if possible is the best route at the moment. In cases of real issues, it could be better, as we saw with Ocado, for example, their online orders, have the confidence to take away your service temporarily, strengthen it, ensure it can handle the demand, rather than trying to persevere through and causing long-lasting damage to your reputation far deeper than this initial period of disruption.
Thanks, Olivia. What examples have we seen of the supply chain going really wrong?
So, as you can imagine, it's varied across the sectors. Some products you can't get, supply is not there despite the demand. Gym equipment, PlayStation controllers, to name a couple. More seriously, we've seen earlier this year, when cities in China were shutting down, the production of medicine exports was being halted from India, leading to medicine supply shortages. And obviously well-documented shortages of PPE. Much was produced in China and couldn't be exported. And also all countries are having to look internally before addressing the export need. In the food and drink sector, perhaps unsurprisingly, we've seen figures from the latest Food and Drink Federation snapshot report showing that UK exports of food and drink dropped by £700 million in the first quarter of 2020. Perhaps unsurprising, large decrease due to immediate impacts of COVID-19, the closure of hotels, restaurants, bars, pretty much overnight. Branded food exports to the EU have declined. Interestingly though, we've seen an uptake in some branded food and drinks towards China, the US and Australia, with China buying gin and Australia buying cakes. So it's not all bad news. But beyond this, we've obviously seen examples of industries which can't function. The leisure and hospitality sector just haven't been able to do business as usual. Weddings have been postponed, holidays, trips cancelled, and as a business you really need to be compassionate to your customers' situations. Any of these events being cancelled are a big deal, and if you make it difficult for them to rearrange or postpone, you are likely to receive backlash. For example, the many travel companies, TUI, British Airways, removing the refund option from their website. It will always come down to cost, whether you can maintain, but if you can maintain that open dialogue with disappointed customers, you're much more likely to receive their custom when they can return. Having said all that, doom and gloom, in some businesses the supply chain today may look completely different to how it did a few months ago, and they're sort of some of the biggest success stories of the pandemic. And the same Food and Drink Federation snapshot report said that there is still reason for food and drink exporters to be optimistic, provided they're willing to adapt and be agile in their production operations to meet the changing global consumer habits brought on by the pandemic.
So just turning to the other side, Olivia, what about some examples where things have gone well and people have managed, organisations have managed to adjust?
Yeah, so we've seen some fantastic good examples across multiple sectors of businesses repurposing themselves. At the very high end, LVMH, within 72 hours of announcing that they were going to start producing hand sanitizer, were doing just that in their perfume factories for Dior and Givenchy. This was then being distributed for free across healthcare workers in France. Closer to home, we saw Deliveroo very quickly introduce non-contact delivery options. So for them, it was a little bit easier, same service, just ever so slightly different, but they were quick to adapt to the changing situation, so it limited the disruption that was caused. I was watching Inside the Factory earlier this week, recommended if you haven't seen it, and they were inside the Walker's crisp factory, and they were saying that now they're producing 90% of their crisp packets to go into multi-packs rather than single sale bags. Not an issue that anyone would ever have envisaged initially. Of course, many adaptations require funds to do that. But even in smaller businesses, we've seen innovation and change. Clothing retailers producing masks. I've seen a couple of swimwear brands using swimwear offcuts to make adjustable strapped masks. Cosmetic companies with hand sanitizer, educational resources being handed out for free. Hospitality industry, we've seen hotels offering free rooms for NHS workers. And it's important to remember that the goodwill gained from any of these endeavours now will stand you in really good stead when we return to business as usual, whatever that might look like.
So how can organisations look at avoiding problems in the future? What are your thoughts?
So hindsight's obviously a wonderful thing, and this crisis has really cast the spotlight, as Georgie said, on your business continuity plans and whether it's fit for purpose. Many will have been drawn up because you need to have them and you have never really expected to use it. Also, this has presented risks that for many hadn't been even contemplated or had not been identified as urgent or business critical. In the short-term future, now is the time to start considering the financial stability of your suppliers. Don't have all your eggs in one basket, consider having alternatives. You may have already had to address some of these issues, but was it an initial quick fix in response to the very quick lockdown? And you might have only been thinking at that point that it was only necessary for a short period. Now we look like we're going to be in this quasi lockdown for a bit longer. Is it sustainable? In the long term, in terms of the supply chain, you need to undertake a network mapping exercise. Do you know where all your suppliers, sites, parts, products, where they all come from? And if there is then a local lockdown, do you know if you're going to be impacted, and can you act quickly to address that? And then I would say consistency across the business with regard to responding to such issues. Policies and guidelines need to be there across teams, and your staff need to be aware of them, so they feel that they have the tools to deal with an issue in the event that in the hope that you can avoid someone then having to go off on a frolic of their own and perhaps cause reputational damage. Essentially, there's going to be two types of businesses that emerge from this, and you'll have those who are grateful it's over and they've survived and just hope it never happens again, and there are those who learn from it, and it will mean that next time, hopefully next time this doesn't happen, but if disaster strikes in whatever form, you're not operating blind. So we're now going to turn back to Georgie, and we're going to look a bit further into cyber and data security, which is particularly prominent in this new online environment.
Thanks, Olivia. So cyber and data security are things which have inherently at that nature issues around brand and reputation issues, particularly when they go wrong. As I said at the beginning, most cybersecurity and risk and crisis management plans weren't formulated with the prospect that a large majority of staff would be working from home. Many organisations have had to effect changes in terms of their IT systems at such a rapid pace, adopting rollout programmes that for many might have taken months, in some cases programmed for years, which have carried the inevitable risk that security is compromised. And with that quick move to get everybody working from home, there are now gaps in systems which play to third-party threats. Successfully countering external threats depends on a number of factors, including the veracity of your organisation's IT system, if it has defence and monitoring systems, and particularly that's the case where state-sponsored and established cyber criminals are at play. Being cyber attacked is very much now part of being a digital business. Gone are the times when it is something that, you know, will only happen to someone else. If you haven't been attacked, it is very likely it will happen to you. The most important thing to take away is that you have appropriate measures to defend, detect and recover effectively. From a reputation perspective, organisations will be judged on whether they were an unlucky target and it could have happened to anyone, or whether they should have known better. and are one of those organisations that have previously been the subject of external threats, often owing to the inadequacies in their systems, easy fixes that could have been made, and several failures to invest. Just turning to the trends that we're seeing at the moment, both as an organisation and with our clients. So top level, 2020 record year for cyber attacks. 46% of UK businesses and 26% of charities have been the victims of cyber attacks this year, and we're just in June. Since the lockdown, hackers have launched a whole wave of cyber attacks to exploit the working from home environment. Phishing is the most prevalent of those mechanisms to get into a system. These attempts are made through the most commonly known email phishing, voice calls, which is on the rise, vishing, referred to, or SMS smishing, in an attempt to get hold of individuals' credentials or otherwise sensitive information. Cybercriminals are targeting individuals as well as organisations and particular industries. We've seen a rise in particular transportation, manufacturing, hospitality, healthcare and insurance. There've recently been an onslaught of really serious cyber attacks on UK businesses. Some of you may recall from what we've seen, Interserve had 100,000 personal details of past and current employees stolen. EasyJet recently had 9 million customer details stolen. Tesco reissued 600,000 club cards after a password stuffing attack, with only 2 days later Boots being hit too. We had the UK's grid middleman Lexon being locked out of their systems by ransomware, and perhaps illustrating the environment that we're in, cyber attacks on home workers increased from 12% in relation to malicious email traffic before we went to lockdown in March to rising to more than 60% 6 weeks later. So really, really significant in terms of the issues around home working environment. Attacks have really increased in their level of sophistication and are targeted around coronavirus related anxieties, particularly often at vulnerable groups or in those sectors that might be predominantly affected. So we've seen malicious emails telling employees they could choose to be furloughed if they signed up to this website, fake requests to reset VPN accounts, fake Zoom sign-in pages, fake chat requests from colleagues. Further increase in spoofing attacks with emails purporting to be from a colleague, for example, fake CEO emails asking workers to donate to charity, or fake IT support emails saying download the new software here. That said, one of the weakest links in an organisation from a cyber or data perspective is actually your people, and the dramatic shift to remote working where new systems are needed but often can't be put in place quickly enough for some. We've seen staff who, understandably have resorted to other methods in order to perform their job, but which the activities they're carrying out or the systems they're trying to use don't conform with IT policies, or they expose the organisation or individual to greater risks. So we're seeing, employees who are sharing files outside of their organisational networks, using personal emails or devices to send emails, documents, print, for example, and actually not having any access to secure methods of document destruction. Video conferencing has exploded, but many systems haven't gone through the appropriate approvals to ensure that is secure, in particular two-factor authentication. We've also seen the downsides with social media, where people showing that they continue to make face-to-face contact only for them to be revealing their conference IDs and passcodes. Perhaps most notoriously, our Prime Minister demonstrated that in one of the first of his cabinet meetings. Unfortunate. Anticipating and countering the threats. Real increased targeted additional awareness and communications for your staff is critical at this stage. Not just how to work securely from home, but reinforcing the threats around phishing and those COVID-19 lures. Ensuring that you've got the systems in place where staff do report back phishing emails that they're spotting, so that you get a sense of what the trends are and that the domains which are linked to those phishing emails can be added to your blacklist. We've seen a dramatic, both in our organisation again, but also with our clients, where there are requests for personal or financial information or requests to transfer money. So the sort of financial side of things really does require a lot of extra vigilance. Finance teams in particular, you should be getting them to review payment protocols and ensure that they are robust in this new working environment. We were party to a situation some weeks ago in relation to a transaction that was due to complete. The financial payment details had all been set up. Money was about to be transferred, and about an hour before, an email purportedly from the CEO copying in the relevant accounts people with whom the parties were familiar resulted in providing different account details. Thankfully, the recipient of that email called the client to check that indeed those details had changed, and the client confirmed that they'd literally just been hacked. So, I mean, that was an incident that was rapid fire within about 2 hours of itself occurring. So it is a real live issue to be aware of. Think about the increased risk of insider threats, particularly in the arena we're in, where staff might have reduced hours, there might be redundancies. Ensure that you have got plans to rapidly restrict employees' access to systems and data, particularly where they are not physically in an office, so you can reduce the risk of data being stolen or systems being damaged. So your plans really should focus on disabling access to physical devices, accounts and systems within the network so far as you can. I'm going to hand back to Olivia just in relation to the preservation of data and confidential information.
Thanks, Georgie. Yeah, just an example actually on the above. So house party, for example, with the sudden influx of video calls, everyone is on them every other day, quizzes, whatever it may be, and love them or hate them, they're going to be around for quite a while. But house party started off as a bit of a lockdown favourite, more among the social circles than business. But within a few weeks, it was besieged by hacking rumours after only a few weeks of lockdown. Epic Games responded forcefully and confidently, alleging that the rumours amounted to a paid commercial smear to harm House Party, and offered on their Twitter account a $1 million reward for the first individual to provide proof of such a campaign. House Party have since said that they haven't, despite their investigations, they haven't found any evidence of such a campaign or a hack. But online you can now find various fact or fiction articles about the hack, and true or not, it's not something you want to have rumoured about you, whether it's true or not. Onto confidential information. It's very important to, obviously again in hindsight, ensure that your employment contracts and associated policies protect businesses from the risk of transfer of proprietary information or adverse social media comments by disgruntled employees. And while addressing the risks that Georgie's discussed in relation to cybersecurity and communicating with staff effectively and honestly, as we'll come on to, should help in minimising the risk to the business, both internally and externally, you do need to be alive to the new threats and the new world that we find ourselves in. Working from home brings an increased threat with regard to confidential data. Employees should follow policies, procedures and guidance, but the employer's responsibility is to make sure that they exist and they are accessible and your staff know what they are. You need to consider whether your staff are using approved technology for handling personal data, the confidentiality on when your staff on the phone at home, you or your staff, displaying on your screen, sharing your screen, even in front of your family members. If you've got 2 solicitors in the house, that's a potential issue. Take care with printouts, particularly disposing of them. Extra vigilant about opening web links, stronger passwords. As Georgia said, 2-factor authentication is crucial. And ensure you have secure communication methods in place and that your systems are up to date. You also need to anticipate the insider threats that are increasing at this time. Organisations obviously facing the prospect of having to make portions of workforce redundant or having to reduce working hours, which can lead to disgruntled employees. They may then start looking to remove intellectual property from the business, gain financially or otherwise cause reputational or financial damage to their employers. And given the move to remote working so quickly, you need to make sure that you have remotely manageable devices such that you can disable access to your systems by a particular person should you so require. It's not possible now, obviously, to amend the employment contracts to cover confidential information or any detail which may have been missing, but it's about dealing with it properly now. We would always advise in a data breach situation to seek legal advice and preserve your position. And unfortunately, things do go wrong. It does happen. But if they do, it's about mitigating the risk as best as possible. And the ultimate test will be in how you deal with it to limit the reputational damage and retain customer trust, ultimately. So we're now going to move back. I'll now move back to Georgie. Onto our final discussion point, which is in relation to corporate and strategic announcements, both internally among your staff and online.
Thanks, Olivia. Could you move the slide deck, please?
There you go.
Thank you. So, all businesses have been pretty much thrown into an online arena, whether they might have been online so much before or not, but certainly in terms of their brand management, they've been very much thrust into that environment. And we have seen with varying degrees the success of corporate and strategic communications. Businesses adapted to this new state of play with real varying degrees of success, particularly when it comes to their reputation management, how they've treated their key stakeholders, whether they're their employees or their customers. What's clear is that in order to avoid a complete marketing fail at the moment, brands need to be really thinking about how they're perceived in the long term. This may mean temporarily bending the rules for consumers, such as the policy of waiving cancellation fees adopted by those in the travel industry, having more of a focus on being helpful and valuable for consumers rather than, having to make that hard sell. Communication both internally and externally is on the spotlight, and how an organisation's response to both, whether in the context of, say, furlough, reduction of hours, refunds, financial announcements, will very much have long-lasting implications for their brand, good or bad. From an internal perspective, your employees are your brand ambassadors, or they're not, and that very much depends on how you communicate with them. So we've definitely seen a slight change of emphasis in terms of how organisations are communicating with their staff, and from a positive perspective, how that plays out in the online environment, in particular social media, where they're getting it right. You're seeing very, very positive stories which are coming from those employees. In the age of social media, where the cancel culture can spread like wildfire through hashtags and shares, you simply can't afford to get it wrong at the moment. So we thought we'd run through some examples of the good, the bad, and a bit ugly, actually. Olivia, I'm going to hand over to you for the first bit. Yeah.
So the key question internally, at least, is whether your workforce are kept aware of your situation and your plans. Are you making decisions without telling them, or are you keeping them in the loop? This is the time to be open, honest, invite comment, hear feedback and react to it. As we keep hearing, we're in unprecedented times, but your workforce will remember how you treated. As Georgie says, they are your brand ambassadors, and don't forget that. For example, so we saw Wetherspoons in March, 23rd of March when we went into lockdown. Nearly 40,000 employees were told that they would only be paid up until the 22nd of March. They wouldn't receive any further payment until Wetherspoons received a government grant. Any bonuses achieved, they were stripped of them. And a video circulated to all staff from Tim Martin encouraged them to seek employment in Tesco's, despite saying he has not abandoned employees and trying to say that Tesco's just needed the staff. Many saw it as a very sarcastic and insensitive suggestion at such a difficult time. Again, Sports Direct, not quite famous for some bad press. Following Boris Johnson's initial lockdown order, Sports Direct remained open, required staff to carry on working through the pandemic, and said that the need to exercise in lockdown made them an essential business. while also introducing price hikes on home gym equipment. So that's their take on that. It certainly didn't go down well with the public, who were obviously very quick to denounce the brand, and they pledged to take their money elsewhere moving forwards. Generated negative publicity nationally. Piers Morgan, who's been a little bit of a force for change during the pandemic, was quoted on Good Morning Britain saying, "We will remember the companies who stepped up to care for their employees and customers, and will remember those who abused their employees," in reference to the brand's actions. And that is entirely true. Consumers, customers will remember what happens now in the years to come. Despite a quick U-turn by Sports Direct and a public apology from Mike Ashley, reputational damage was already done. That's a testimonial to the importance of getting these communications right first time, because it is difficult to salvage if you don't. Back to Georgie now, actually, and the world of football, to see how they handled it. Thanks,
Olivia. Well, I think mixed is the answer to that. So again, there were the good and the bad. The football industry, which is, I find interesting personally, liking football, where people are getting excited or not in what might be the return next week, actually generally had a very mixed public response, I think, to the COVID-19 outbreak. We saw a great example with former Manchester United players Ryan Giggs and Gary Neville, who were very quick to demonstrate that footballers can turn their wealth and resources to a good cause. Not only did they pledge straight away to keep all staff on full pay throughout the pandemic, but they opened up their hotel, football and stock exchange hotels in Manchester to keep key workers free of charge, which, you know, provided 176 beds for NHS staff. Created an extremely positive public reaction. Perhaps then to be contrasted with, you know, those Premier League clubs that are seen to have deep pockets and have seen lacking in how they've handled the pandemic. Again, certainly in comparison with our European rivals, who the big clubs, particularly in Spain, were very quick to take pay cuts, or the players were. So we saw particularly one of the issues with Liverpool, whose reputation took a bit of a hit, certainly initially, having made a profit of 42 million last year and having very wealthy owners, to then say it was going to use taxpayer money to furlough all its staff, provoked a huge backlash, including from its supporter base. And within 48 hours, it reversed its decision. So really showing how that galvanisation of, you know, public opinion can get things changed around, but still came in for criticism for not getting it right in the end. Going back to what Olivia says, getting it right at the beginning is absolutely critical. Contrast that to their rivals, Manchester City, who were the first Premier League club to announce that they wouldn't be placing staff on furlough and they'd be continuing on full pay. Olivia, back to you.
Unfortunately, it's another bad example for me, although this one started out positive. So Dyson ruined some of their hard work a couple of weeks ago. They obviously were involved in the ventilator production, and many staff were proud to work for the organisation, which really galvanised through the difficulties of the pandemic and was prepared to assist. However, as soon as the lockdown relaxing discussion started happening, there was a Guardian article a couple of weeks ago where it was transpired that a group of 2,500 employees at Dyson had received an email on a Friday night after business hours on the 15th of May, informing them they had to return to work the following week. It said the company had reopened one of its campuses and the staff would be divided into 2 rotating teams. One of the quotes in the Guardian article was that somebody was saying how everyone was obviously really unhappy, and she actually said, as a company, we were pretty proud of James Dyson a few weeks ago, trying to make a difference with the COVID medical ventilator project, but in a few weeks it's all turned around. If they had their way, there would have been 2,500 people in the office, and I'd estimate 60% of those could work from home with a low impact. So it's that quick, one wrong decision, unfortunately, and you're back to square one. So although it sounds harsh, it is making that right decision straight from the off. hopefully Georgie has a nice good example to finish us with.
Yeah, I do. So I thought Costa was one of them, who, you know, in a different respect, had to close their stores. They thanked staff and customers very publicly. They promised their staff full average pay for almost 8 weeks, free coffee to NHS workers. And then, you know, in terms of keeping in touch with their customer base, which we've seen lots of brands do actually really effectively, started releasing recipes for some of their most popular snacks. Not every company can afford to do what they and indeed others have done in terms of, you know, both continuing to pay people or offer a different aspect of the business that they are providing another service. But the point about it really is managing what you can and communicating that message effectively internally and externally. Absolutely everything which an organisation does at the moment is cast into the spotlight from that online perspective. One of the things that we've seen arise in, certainly in terms of where clients are voicing concerns, is around online reviews. So being aware of what is written about you, good or bad, and actually just pausing to think at this moment in time, what is the appropriate response? So the days pre-COVID where there might have been negative views online, you know, there was a rush to comment, maybe send a letter. Those comments could have been very well defamatory, derogatory, and a hard line was taken. I think in this current environment, there is a refresh and a pause as to whether that type of more aggressive approach is appropriate, and actually if a different messaging can be achieved in terms of explaining what you are doing well and why you're doing what you're doing. I think above all, the predominant message is to be honest, providing that doesn't land you, you know, in legal difficulty in terms of admitting some form of serious liability. That's not the case for most organisations, but I think that honesty and integrity is absolutely critical at the moment. It's all too easy to make a knee-jerk reaction, whether that's the COVID situation as a whole or just, you know, down to a single misconceived tweet. So key takeaway is ensure you're doing all you can to prevent the issues when they are but that when they arise, and they will in a large number of circumstances, that you have got that toolkit and equipped to deal with them in the best and most measured way, to avoid long-lasting damage beyond what will be hopefully not too long a pandemic in terms of where we are. So if you have any questions, please do submit them. If you have, as we have experienced with this sort of subject matter previously, something which is quite specific, do feel free to email that to this email address, events@irwinmitchell.com, and we will pick that up and come back to you. We have found that the challenges organisations are facing, whilst there is some collective parity of issues, they are on a very individual basis with certain very peculiar facts, circumstances around them that require a one-on-one approach. So let us know if you need that. Olivia, could you just go back to the other slide as well?
Yeah.
Please also do take a look at our coronavirus hub, which has got details of all our webinars, articles and commentary in relation to the issues that we were seeing, along with forthcoming webinars which you can sign up to. Thank you for attending our virtual event. I really hope you found it useful. Really appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to complete the feedback form, which will have been sent to you. Thank you all, everyone. In the absence of any immediate questions through, we will take those through the email address provided to you, and wish you all a good day. Take care, everybody.